What's going on, Goosers? Welcome back to the fifth and final episode of the Genghis Khan series. Um, I think in the future I'm going to try and condense a little bit, not do 5 episodes, maybe keep it to 2 to 3 max. Um, so if you have any suggestions, definitely shoot those down in the comments. I'm definitely going to do another series. We're just got to feel out which one I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it because I think I went a little too crazy with this one. I did maybe a little too much research. But anyway, uh, as I mentioned briefly in the previous episode, kind of going to go over some things that most people wouldn't know about Chinggis in this conclusion episode, sort of give my opinions on him. You might have gotten the sense that I was giving him a little more slack than most people would in terms of, you know, the thoughts on him being a bad guy and an evil guy and a killer, which he kind of was. But I'm gonna give my thoughts on uh, on that topic today, as well as give you a few more fun facts to get goosed about. So Chinggis was just so far ahead of his time in so many ways. We'll start with the army because that's kind of his bread and butter, his military. But if you remember with his little feud with Jamuka, where their ideologies differed, Chinggis was a merit-based guy. He wanted people in power, in charge, because they proved that they can do it. So he picked his guys, his top generals. He picked them based on merit, based on who's done it on the battlefield, right? Who's been successful in war, and so that was a huge part of his success because he picks his guys who can win, not just who's got money or who's politically powerful like in some of these other empires. uh, he's there to win. He's not messing around. Now these guys did turn out to be his friends later, some of them, so it worked out that way. Like Jeeb was super trusted. Subude, same thing. I think they were pretty tight towards the end, but they had earned their way to that spot into his friendship. So just way ahead of his time there. On top of that, he was also super organized with his military. He had sort of built these factions of 10,000 men out of his army. So each of these 10,000 factions had a leader that was chosen by Chinggis, and then they would break those up into smaller thousand groups, and each of those thousands would have leaders. So it was a super organized organization they had going on there. This wasn't just some mob where he puts together 100,000 Mongol freaks and tells them to just go nuts out there. They were organized, and I don't think people realize that either. You just get the kind of idea that they were savages and they were just running around chopping heads off, which they were, but they were also organized while they were doing it. So take that as you will. Um, he also wasn't afraid to fight a little more unconventionally, a little more outside the box, right? So think about those other empires, how they were sending out their phalanx and they were lined up in those square formations, and you kind of just went at each other, and there wasn't a whole lot of thought behind it other than here's our army, here's your army, let's just duke it out. Chinggis wasn't afraid to do the more, let's say, probably perceived as cowardly things back then, like a fake retreat, as we talked about, or he sent in that smaller army towards the Jin dynasty while he was working on a much larger flank, hundreds of miles away. So he wasn't afraid to do those things. And I was actually talking about this with Mrs. Goose, and she brought up a really good point about how that sort of sounds like a George Washington type deal, right? When we took down the Brits, um, they were undermanned. They didn't have the same technology that the Brits had. They didn't have the same financial backing. Same thing with Chinggis. He was pretty much constantly um, outnumbered during these battles. He was constantly behind the ball in the technology. Think about, remember those poison gas and the fireballs and all these walled empires that had sort of been developing much longer than the Mongolians had. So Chinggis really had to be creative like George Washington did to take down these larger, more advanced empires. The guy's a genius. You couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that. I just think that it's super cool that he was able to overcome his obstacles with what he was working with. Now, he obviously had his military victories, and there are a lot of notable accomplishments with all of that. But even we'll talk about some things that even more people probably wouldn't know. Um, I think a super notable achievement of his is that he established like a real postal system, a real post system for the first time probably ever, as far as I could find it. I doubt there was anything really this substantial in terms of a postal system. So what he did was he's realizing like, all right, so horses can only go so far, right? One guy on one horse, and so if you want to get mail to somebody, it takes a long time because the mailman's got to stop and rest. The horse has got to eat. He's got to eat. So what he did was he set up these stations along Asia, and so these stations would have fresh horses, right? So the postman could hop off his horse, set it down, grab a fresh horse. He's on his way. He doesn't have to rest. Horse doesn't have to eat, drink while he's on the move. So just developed a much faster way to get information across his empire. Again, just he's thinking, guys. He's thinking. Think about what you would be thinking in the early 1200s, and I guarantee you're not thinking on that kind of level. You're like, oh, can I have more gold? Right? That's what I would probably be thinking. Genghis is like, how can I advance the postal system in Mongolia? Right? I don't know. I think it's crazy. And so to kind of piggyback off that, Genghis also revitalized the Silk Road, which probably is an even bigger deal than the postal system. And so really for the first time, there's a trade route under one authority that expands multiple continents. And this is wildly significant because now you're able to trade from Japan all the way to Eastern Europe, and they probably have the people in Eastern Europe has probably never seen anything from Japan, and vice versa, right? So now you're sort of opening the door to a more globalized world, more interconnected world, where you have access to different cultures. Super cool. Sort of like the internet in a way. That was their internet. The postal system and the Silk Road. Because the Silk Road, it did exist before, but it sort of spread across multiple empires, and I'm sure things got political and things were intercepted, is my guess. Things didn't always get where they were supposed to go. So Genghis, under his leadership, under the Mongol Empire, really locked down the Silk Road and sort of opened the world up for people. Another cool thing that he did was in his empire you were allowed religious freedoms. So most empires during those days were one religion, right? And if you disagreed, you had problems with whatever the king or the Shah or the prince, whoever was deciding. If you disagreed with him, you were going to be in a little trouble. But Genghis was like, I don't care. As long as you believe in the Mongol Empire, and you subscribe to what I'm all about, you can go do whatever you want. So his empire had a number of different religions. Genghis himself believed in a sky god. He would pray to the sky, which, in the 1200s, late 1100s, that makes sense to me. Like, you look up at the sky, you see clouds, and you're like, what? Like, what is that? That's got to be God, the sun, and all that. I'd probably be doing the same thing. So he believed in the sky god. He'd pray to the sky. He did that to make most of his decisions. He would spend a lot of time praying, most of his major decisions. So super cool of him. For the most part, he was a fair ruler. He let people do what they want. Again, as long as you followed his rules, you bought into the Mongol Empire, you were fine. You just had to do your part, and he was good to you. That's just something that I think people miss a lot, because they probably think he was this dictator who would kill you at the drop of a hat, which he would kill you, likely, if you crossed him the wrong way. But if you if you did what he said, he was fine. He let you do whatever you want. Now, if you broke a law or anything like that, like I said, he'd probably be a little harsh. But in those days, I think he was probably pretty fair compared to others. And so last, we do have to talk about his legacy. Really cool fun fact that goosed me up personally was that his last ruling descendant, and get this, his last ruling descendant was removed from power in 1920. 1920. So his descendants remained in some sort of political power from early 1200s, right? Late 1100s, early 1200s, all the way to 1920. That's not that far off from where we are now. It's 100 years. That's wild. And then there's also that study that's pretty famous that says about 100 or 1 in 200 males are related to Genghis today. I did not look into this at all. That's just the famous study that was done. I can't confirm or deny it. Seems a little far-fetched, but I mean, he still has a lot of descendants either way. So that's a big part of his legacy. In a good and bad way, he did spread his seed quite often, and probably to some unwilling participants. But he does have a lot of relatives. So there's that. And so to put a bow on this whole series, really tie it up, I think we look back on history and we look at Genghis and we see evil, torturous, madman. And I'm going to keep saying it, he was those things to a degree, but we need to look back and we need to look at all the things that he did do that advanced society and advanced humankind so much further than they would have without him. All the things I've just mentioned. Also, those were dangerous, brutal, horrible times. There was a ton of torture. He wasn't the only one torturing. If we're going to hold him accountable for that, we got to hold everyone else accountable. He may have been a little bit more than people were used to, but the times were just rough. And like I said, he had to do what he had to do to win. He had to do what he had to do for his people. I get that. I'm not condoning some of the actions, but for the time, some of those things were required. So that's what I mean when I've been cutting him some slack over the past few episodes. Did some bad things. He may have had to do those things. You know, those were the times. So, again, thank you all for listening. I'm going to try and keep things a little shorter in the next series. Send me your suggestions. Learned a lot. Hope you learned a lot. I was goosed. I'm almost certain you'll be goosed by the end of all of this. And look forward to making another one. Alright, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And join the gaggle. Thanks.